he suddenly realized the most charming teacher in the whole school was actually a complete liar. However, this teacher was completely unaware and continued to recount her adventurous experiences in Africa. Just as she reached the most thrilling part, and the other girls were listening intently, Fiamma suddenly spoke out the following content. This caused a momentary flash of panic in Miss G's eyes. You must have heard me tell this one before. But soon, she composed herself and continued telling the story. However, Fiamma didn't let her off the hook. She continued to preemptively reveal what she was about to say. Di, unable to bear the disrespect towards her revered teacher, quietly scolded Fiamma for being too talkative and said that these were all Miss D's personal experiences. But Fiamma confidently retorted, this is simply a plot from a best-selling novel. Not only that, he had just seen in Miss D's box his stolen cookies. Those were Spanish cookies sent by his father, so he could absolutely not be mistaken. Even the postcard filled with his father's expectations had been stolen and secretly kept by Miss J. However, although Fiamma felt Miss J was hypocritical in order to live peacefully in this boarding school, he did not intend to delve further. But what he never expected was that temporary silence would ultimately lead to the withering of his life. It turned out they were in a church-run boarding school. This place specifically took in homeless girls. This school was far isolated from the outside world, and the school's spirit was extremely strict. The rules were extremely harsh. Besides occasional sports and reading, students spent most of their time singing hymns in the church. They had to wear school uniforms and ties daily, and could only change into casual clothes on weekends. Not only that, even the bedside tables in the dormitories were only allowed to have 5 personal items. The faculty and staff here were also old-fashioned and pedantic. Only Miss J seemed particularly different. She was flamboyant and open-minded, like a proud red rose standing tall. Every time she appeared, she made people couldn't help but look sideways. She was the teacher of the school's diving team, and also the spiritual sustenance for all the girls, because she could always use beautiful words to passionately encourage the girls to bravely pursue the value of life and to fearlessly release the desires in their hearts. And the girls all imitated her and admired her, eagerly showing themselves in front of her just to get her favor and pity. However, beyond the girls' gaze, Miss G was a completely different person. She became timid, cowardly, and hesitant. Not only did she dare not make eye contact with strangers, she even wanted to avoid the reflection of her own image in the glass. Even when going out of campus to purchase daily necessities, she needed to repeatedly recite the shopping list. However, the moment she mustered up the courage to step into the store, she was pierced by the ordinary gazes of people around her, shattering her already fragile psychological defenses. In fact, this was Miss J's true self. She had grown up within these walls since childhood and had never seen the world outside. That seemingly unrestrained and adventurous image was just a carefully crafted persona. In essence, she was no different from the other girls in the school. They were all pitiful people who had been abandoned by their parents in their youth, struggling alone in this confined space. Therefore, she transferred her long-suppressed emotions and desires to these naive girls, using them to build a kingdom that belonged only to herself. Until the arrival of the aristocratic girl, Fiamma unintentionally pierced her carefully woven dream. Because Fiamma was the daughter of Spanish nobility, she was elegant and noble, with an extraordinary temperament. But it was this innate distinctiveness that attracted the discussions of other girls. Some praised her like a fairy descended to earth, while others mocked her for having large and ugly features. But whether it was praise or criticism, Fiamma acted as if she hadn't heard anything, and busied herself organizing the items she had brought. However, the seemingly arrogant posture of hers made Di, who was the leader, very dissatisfied. So Di walked directly to Fiamma's side, wanting to give her a show of force. Unexpectedly, she was ridiculed instead, the sound of the world ending. The animosity between the two of them was thus formed. Afterwards, Fiamma still went her own way, and even arrived late for her first diving class. However, facing Miss J's accusation, she still argued on principle, claiming that she was not late, but that other students had arrived too early. Although what Fiamma said was true, Miss G, whose authority was challenged, still wanted to deliberately make things difficult for her. So she asked Dai, her most proud student, to be the first to do a diving demonstration. Because Dai was also holding back a fire of jealousy, she completed the challenge without hesitation. Immediately after, Miss J urged Fiamma to go on stage. Due to suffering from severe asthma, Fiamma didn't want to go into the water at first. But Miss J not only turned a deaf ear, but also kept using provocative methods to press her hard, as if determined to see her make a fool of herself. Helplessly, she could only take off her robe, and elegantly and calmly step onto the diving platform. Just when everyone thought she would be a laughingstock, she calmly stretched out her arms, and then leaped cleanly and neatly. Like a shooting star streaking across the night sky, leaving behind an unforgettable trace. Just like that, this newly arrived noble princess surprised everyone. Miss J also changed her attitude from before, and praised her as a rare talent. Only Dai's jealousy in her heart grew stronger. Therefore, in the days that followed, she often colluded with friends to exclude and bully Fiamma, trying to use the harshest words to tear apart the dazzling halo on her body. However, Fiamma didn't take these inexplicable malice to heart, because she only wanted her father to pick her up and take her home sooner. But in this tightly bound campus, watching the smaller children cry for their mothers in their nightmares, she would also unconsciously reveal anxiety, worrying about whether she would be forgotten here forever. Fortunately, soon, her worries all dissipated. This day, her father sent a super large package, filled with her favorite snacks and postcards full of exotic flavors. Realizing that her father still cared about her, Fiamma was as happy as a child. Even when the girls who had bullied her before asked to taste her snacks, she generously shared them without bearing grudges. And facing her friendliness and generosity, the girls also changed their previous harsh attitude, not only praising the cookies as simply delicious, but also proactively asking her to tell some adventure stories. Just like that, surrounded and anticipated by everyone, Fiamma began to tell stories vividly. When talking about thrilling and exciting plots, he also didn't forget to light a piece of wrapping paper to create an immersive atmosphere. Because they had never experienced this kind of feeling, everyone present was attracted by Fiamma. Especially Miss J, who dared not truly touch the outside world, fell into an irredeemable dreamlike intoxication. Since then, she was like possessed, not only secretly flipping through Fiamma's personal files, but also taking a bite of the cookie and Fiamma's postcard, secretly hiding them away as if preserving treasures. But this wanton voyeurism and theft still could not satisfy the desires in her heart. Therefore, in order to have more contact with Fiamma, she often secretly ran to the girls' dormitory late at night, and then used her usual romantic and bewitching tone to gently wake them up from their sleep, to go outside for a romantic night swim together. The quiet lake surface at night was sprinkled with moonlight. Miss J took off her light pajamas first, and then jumped into the water with a leap. Perhaps infected by her bold and romantic move, or perhaps it was this charming moonlight that had the magic to awaken people's hearts. The girls also took off their clothes one after another, and then plunged into the lake one by one. For a time, the originally calm lake surface was stirred up with layers of ripples. And under the bright moonlight, the girls were like mermaids walking out of a fairy tale world, shuttling and swimming leisurely in the lake. In the cheerful atmosphere, Miss J mentioned her past travels in India. Because Fiamma had also been to India with her father before, she immediately became interested after hearing this. The two of them started to communicate like this. However, as the topic deepened, Fiamma noticed that Miss J was always evasive, especially when asked about the details of traveling to various countries. But she didn't know the specific reason at this time. Until not long after, in Miss G's room, filled with souvenirs left from her travels around the world, she saw the half-eaten cookie placed in the box, and the postcard her father sent her. But at this moment, Fiamma was still just guessing, until she heard Miss G tell a personal experience that was actually a story written in a biography book. She completely saw through Miss G's disguise. And Miss G, who was always exquisite and charming, after discovering that her lie had been exposed, also had a crack in her face. Although Fiamma did not expose her in public, Miss G still felt uneasy and anxious. Because it was like a sharp blade hanging over her head, not knowing when it might suddenly fall and shatter the beautiful fantasy she had pretended to be. In order not to let the worst outcome happen, Miss J began to make things difficult for Fiamma. In diving class, she knew that Fiamma had asthma, but still deliberately made her frequently go on stage for demonstrations. And Fiamma could only endure the physical discomfort and grit her teeth to complete one action after another. However, during the last dive, Fiamma, who entered the water, did not surface for a long time. The surrounding girls all showed worried looks, only Miss J stood by and watched coldly. Perhaps at this moment, she really hoped that Fiamma would remain at the bottom of the water forever. Fortunately, after a moment, Fiamma struggled out of the water, and Miss J immediately put on a smiling face, extravagantly praising her for having perseverance and courage. But at this time, Fiamma had no strength to speak at all, and was even almost unable to breathe. So the first thing she did after going ashore was to grab the medicine on the ground and inhale it deeply. After slightly easing up, she ran away into the small wooden house not far away as if escaping. In the wooden house, she could finally use the medicine with peace of mind. However, just as her breathing returned to normal, Miss J followed her like a haunting spirit again. Facing the demon who almost killed her, Fiamma didn't even dare to breathe loudly, let alone, the other party also warned her in a seemingly gentle tone, it's best not to talk nonsense everywhere. After experiencing this terrible ordeal, Fiamma chose to stay away from everyone to avoid attracting more unknown dangers. But Miss G always tried her best to find her and persuaded her to continue to integrate into the group no matter what. After all, they might live here until they grow old in the future. However, Fiamma didn't think so. She felt that her father would definitely come to pick her up and take her home, and the other girls would eventually leave as well. Hearing these words, a trace of panic obviously flashed in Miss J's eyes, and then tears uncontrollably gushed out. She couldn't imagine how unbearable her life would become if these girls all left. Her life would become unbearable. All along, she had boasted that she was the spiritual sustenance for the girls, but in fact, the girls were her spiritual pillar. If she lost these girls who admired her, the ideal world she had built would instantly collapse. As for Fiamma, her feelings were even more complicated. On the one hand, she was afraid that Fiamma would tell the truth. On the other hand, she envied and yearned for the beauty in Fiamma, because that was what she truly desired. Slowly, she fell into contradictions and confusion, so that her feelings for Fiamma gradually deteriorated and even developed a near abnormal love. Perhaps in her already distorted perception, only by gaining Fiamma's approval could she truly feel the value of her existence. So, Miss G began to show Fiamma all kinds of goodwill again. Even though she was afraid to go out and meet strangers, she would still buy exquisite desserts exclusively for Fiamma to enjoy alone. However, this blatant favoritism attracted the dissatisfaction of other girls, especially Dai. In order to regain the lost love, Dai asked everyone in the dormitory to donate some food, and then roughly drew a map, and then aggressively found Fiamma, telling her to take the things and get lost quickly. And Fiamma didn't want to stay here any longer, so without hesitation, she turned and ran like a bird breaking free from its cage, bravely flying towards the boundless sky. However, things did not go as the girls wished. In less than a day, Fiamma's disappearance was discovered by the school. The dormitory manager and teachers went out to search for her one after another. Miss J was even more like she had lost her soul, standing in the cold wind of the ferry, gazing into the distance. At this time, Fiamma was calling her father, but no matter how she tried and prayed, there was no response from the other end. As night fell, lights were lit up. The runaway Fiamma was sent back to school by the police. However, Fiamma's return to campus put Miss G in further predicament. This day, the diving team members trained as usual. At first, the atmosphere was still very harmonious and amiable. The girls' performances were all perfect, and Miss G did not hesitate to praise and encourage them. But suddenly, Fiamma proposed to go out of campus to participate in competitions. This made Miss G, who dared not contact the outside world, instantly panic. And what made her even more sad and at a loss was that other girls, including Dai, also showed agreement and anticipation. Faced with the situation about to get out of control, Miss J, who was once elegant and dazzling, gritted her teeth in anger, her hair disheveled. Because she couldn't bear to see Miss J sad, Di took the initiative to find Fiamma, telling her not to be selfish and to consider the team atmosphere more. But at this time, Fiamma still only wanted to go home and didn't want to integrate into group life at all. But among the girls here, who doesn't want to go home? But who can really go home? Although they didn't want to admit it, they had all been exiled by their families. Now all they could do was hug each other tightly to keep warm. Watching Di, who was usually stubborn and strong, actually have tears in her eyes at this moment, Fiamma's heart suddenly softened, and she also realized her mistake. So the next day, she took the initiative to find Di and gave her the treasured perfume. In addition, she also said, "If my integration into the group can make Miss G care about you more, then I will try hard in the future." Just like that, the relationship between the two finally eased. In the days that followed, Di is no longer mean, and Fiamma also began to get along with the girls. However, their gradual closeness made Miss G mistakenly believe that she was being excluded, and her eyes also began to unconsciously reveal gloom and jealousy. Finally, on a midnight filled with a sense of indulgence, she released the beast suppressed in her heart. That night was initially a carnival night for the girls. They secretly changed into their most beautiful clothes and put on the most exquisite makeup for each other. The soft light cast by the faint night lamp gently reflected the most authentic color of youth. They, with ignorance and curiosity, learned to drink like adults. When their eyes became increasingly blurred, the topic of conversation and their mouths unconsciously shifted to their views on the opposite sex. The unique throbbing of adolescence also gradually rose. And at this time, Miss J downstairs was lonely hiding in a corner, eavesdropping on this feast. Her already thin figure looked even more desolate in the dim light. Suddenly, a loud noise came from upstairs. It was the sound of the girls dropping the wine bottle when they were drunk and tipsy. Wine bottles slipping from their hands and falling to the ground. But because the noise was too loud, the dormitory manager also came upon hearing the sound. Faced with the dormitory manager's accusatory posture, Miss J changed her usual timidity, forcefully stopped the barrage of questions, and drove her away. Then she went upstairs alone. The moment the dormitory door was pushed open, the girls were so frightened that they sobered up a bit from the wine. Only Fiamma, who was drunk as mud, was still lying on the ground unconscious. Looking at the panicked faces one by one, Miss G first asked the other girls to clean up. And then, on the pretext of taking care of her personally, took Fiamma to her room. At this point, the midnight feast ended, and tragedy was about to unfold. Looking at Fiamma's sleeping face, Miss G took a wet towel and gently wiped the mottled makeup on her face while talking to herself and expressing her true feelings. But those gorgeous words that she usually used to highlight her extraordinary nature and show off her extraordinariness now carried a different kind of possessiveness. Fiamma was the Ma she dreamed of day and night, unattainable to her, but an incomparably desired perfect existence. She was the kind of person she wanted to become all her life. In this almost crazy infatuation, Miss J did something unforgivable to Fiamma. And this unbearable scene happened to be completely seen by Di, who had chased after her. Di couldn't believe what she saw and fled in panic and shock. One day, Fiamma discovered that she had been molested. In a fit of rage, she ignored Miss G's pleas and insisted on making the humiliation she suffered public, to let everyone see the ugly true face of this hypocritical teacher. And the diving girls who knew nothing about it only saw the two of them pulling and tugging, unclear about what was happening. Just when everyone was confused and puzzled, Di, who was extremely blinded, actually completely disregarded the truth of the matter and wantonly spread rumors about Fiamma. She said Fiamma was a little prostitute who had not only seduced many men before, but also pretended to be drunk last night and seduced Miss G. And at this time, Miss G, due to poor communication, was scratching her head and carefully thinking about how to keep her secret. Because she was originally a parasite in the school, if she was exposed, she would definitely be driven away. And once driven away, she would be unable to survive on her own at all. Just then, Di came to comfort her. So she had a flash of inspiration and thought of a trick to borrow a knife to kill someone. For a long time, she knew Di's weakness and even knew Di's dependence on her. So she first put on a pitiful appearance, winning Dai's heartache and pity, and then acted like a frightened fawn, claiming that Fiamma wanted to ruin her reputation. Finally, she buried her head in Dai's chest and cried that if the school believed the rumors and expelled her, she would only be able to leave here and continue her previous adventure journey. Sure enough, the set of combos came down. Dai, who was already jealous, completely lost her mind. Because she had already lost the love of her family and had been living with Miss J's company all these years. If Miss J really left like this, it would be tantamount to being abandoned again for her. So she absolutely would not allow this to happen. Just like that, Dai, together with other diving team members, aggressively found Fiamma to question her. At first, Fiamma still tried hard to argue, but to condemn someone, there is no need to worry about excuses. Moreover, Dai was already standing on Miss J's side. Fiamma, who was isolated and helpless, wanted to turn around and run away, but how could jackals easily let go of a rabbit? Just like that, companions who had just confided in each other and had a carnival together yesterday, today pressed her into the mud and punched and kicked her, until she was on the verge of death due to asthma attack. Then the crowd stopped this bullying. In fact, at first, Dai just wanted to give Fiamma a lesson. So, when she realized that it was about to cause a death, she immediately asked others to run for help, and she also quickly found Fiamma's asthma medicine. But when she was about to give Fiamma medicine, Miss J, who had been watching from afar, suddenly walked up to her with a serious expression, and after taking the medicine, found a reason to send her away. However, after sending Dai away, Miss J not only did not immediately give Fiamma medicine, but instead hugged her tightly, and in the gentlest tone, said the most chilling words. "Go to sleep now, go to sleep." Soon, Fiamma closed her eyes in the hypnotic voice and stopped breathing. Then Miss G stuffed the medicine into her hand, making a look of trying her best to rescue but being powerless. And Dai, who was the first to run back, happened to witness all of this, but before she had time to panic, she was stopped by Miss J's vicious gaze, stopping her mouth from wanting to shout. Afterwards, the girls fell into self-blame one after another, and Dai's heart was even more tormented. Finally, after a period of ideological struggle, she chose to tell everything she saw. Everyone was shocked and angry after hearing this, and immediately found Miss J to confront her. But Miss J only wanted to gloss over the matter and restore the past beauty of the diving team. However, this time she miscalculated. "You don't deserve us." The girls were no longer deceived by her and took off the red ribbons around their waist one after another. Red ribbons around their waist that represented the diving team to draw a line with her. Subsequently, Dai told the school about Miss J's crimes. But the principal, in order to maintain the reputation of the school, chose to cover up the truth. Internally, they dismissed Miss G in the name of vacation. Externally, they claimed that Fiamma simply died of an asthma attack. Later, Miss G, because she dared not go anywhere else, could only rent a room in a small hotel near the school. On the simple bedside table in the hotel, she still only dared to place 5 personal items, as if her false and pathetic life, in the end, was disciplined to have only a few things left. And Dai, carrying the perfume and map given by Fiamma, embarked on a journey to see the world outside. In the past, she had lived in the illusion woven by Miss G. In the future, she will personally pursue true desires and freedom. Cracks is directed by Jordan Scott and starring Eva Green and María Valverde, a drama film released in 2009. Miss J, although seemingly flamboyant on the surface and open-minded, always encouraged students to be brave and adventurous and strive to pursue their own desires. The students also regard her as a spiritual leader, but in fact, she is as timid as a mouse. Not only does she dare not make eye contact with strangers outside the school, even going out for purchasing, she has to do psychological preparation for a long time. It is only because she has lived in a boarding school since childhood. Because this school has an extremely strict school spirit, students are required to stick to conventions and are not allowed to have too much contact with the outside world. So even if Miss J grows up and becomes a teacher in the school, she is still disciplined and dare not have any transgression in her behavior. But deep in her heart, she yearns to break free from shackles. So in the game between reality and ideal, she packaged herself as a brave and charming adventurer. For this reason, she also built a perfect world in her imagination. Initially, this illusory world was indestructible until Fiamma suddenly broke in, violently tearing open a crack. And in order to protect this beautiful fantasy world, Miss J cruelly deprived Fiamma of her life. Some say that everyone has the urge to stifle beauty, which is a deep-seated inferiority and cowardice. And isn't this also a true portrayal of Miss J? Even when killing Fiamma, she still hypnotized herself to believe that Fiamma should not have come into this world in the first place. However, beneath the tragic undertone, there is also a transmission about courage. Although Miss J did not have the courage to step out of her comfort zone, she had a dream about courage. And this dream constantly inspired Dai, allowing Dai to be ahead of other girls when facing the hard boarding life, to soberly realize that she has no possibility of returning home. Although on the surface she is domineering and bossy, she is also in a closed cage, the only one who tries her best to maintain the balance of relationships and strive to protect the remaining bit of happiness. Later, when Fiamma suddenly broke in and disrupted the original harmony, she also passed on courage to Fiamma, allowing Fiamma to no longer escape the fact of being abandoned by her family. Finally, when she personally exposed Miss J's true face, she took the courage fed back by Fiamma and embarked on a real adventure journey. In fact, everyone has a Miss J in their heart, without the courage to face their true selves, and even dare not take the first step to change. Can only be an ostrich, living by fantasy, fantasizing that someone can save them from fire and water, fantasizing that one day they can soar into the sky. But when true beauty approaches, they are often, because of the cowardice in their bones, either tormenting themselves or wanting to destroy everything. However, everything has cracks. That is the flaw, but also the place where light comes in. As long as you have the courage to face it correctly, you can counterattack from desperation and live towards the sun. Okay, today's movie recap sharing ends here. Welcome everyone to like, comment, and forward. I am Movie Recap Online. Looking forward to seeing you next time.